Mercy was never a law wolves wrote for easy seasons. It was a law they wrote because winter always came, because one day even the proudest house might have only one survivor left, shaking at a stranger's gate with a child under her heart and nowhere else to go. Evangeline Ravencrest had believed that law belonged to stories elders told beside firelight, a relic too old to matter in an age of councils and forged alliances. Yet as thunder rolled over the mountain pass and pain cinched her body from spine to belly, that brittle scrap of ancient mercy was the only thing she had left to spend. 3 months after her mate was killed on Ravencrest Stone, she reached the basalt causeway that marked wildfire territory, with blood stiffening the hem of her cloak and rain flattening her hair to her cheeks. The causeway ran like a black blade over the gorge, slick with storm water, narrow enough that one misstep would send her into the roaring white churn below. Behind her, a hunting horn split the night again, closer this time, followed by the distant beat of hooves and the metallic clatter of armed men who had already burned one home and meant to claim whatever remained. Another contraction took her in the center of the bridge. She braced both hands on the wet stone parapet and bowed over her belly, breath tearing out of her in short, helpless bursts. Too soon, her mind kept saying, not now, not here. But her body no longer asked permission from reason. She tasted copper where she had bitten her lip and felt the moonstone token press hard against her palm, its edges familiar from weeks of gripping it in sleep. Her dead mate had worn it at his throat the day they found him. She had cut it free with numb fingers before the pyre took him. It was all she carried that had not been stolen. Evangeline Ravencrest, she whispered into the rain, voice shaking so hard she barely heard herself. Under old law, under life law, let me reach the gate. The fortress rose out of the mountain ahead, angular and severe, torchlight burning along high ramparts like watchful eyes. By the time she stumbled onto the final ascent, mud and ash streaked her skirts, and each step jarred a deep, grinding pressure through her hips. The outer gate loomed closed, iron-bound cedar blackened by age and weather. She struck it once with her fist, then again, then dropped to her knees when her legs gave out. Sanctuary, she gasped, by widow's claim, I carry life. The wicket hatch snapped open. 2 guards stared down, expressions hardening at the sight of her blood and crest pin. One of them recognized the sigil and swore softly. Ravencrest fell, he said. Then you know what follows, she answered. Please. The horn sounded from the ridge path. Lanterns flared in the dark behind her, bobbing fast. Men on horseback emerged through rain, cloaks stamped with the split antler mark of House Varin, the house that had led the raid on her pack under the pretense of debt arbitration. Their captain pulled up first, face thin and eager, water running off his jawline. She belongs to contracted custody, he called to the gate. Deliver her, and there is no quarrel with Wildfire. Evangeline twisted to look at him, fury cutting through fear for one clean second. I am not a cart of grain. The captain smiled without warmth. You are a widow carrying disputed bloodline property. The words hit harder than the rain. Not mother, not mate, not even enemy. Property. The guards exchanged a glance. One vanished from the hatch. Minutes scraped by while storm wind knifed through her soaked cloak. Another contraction rose, vicious and sudden, and she cried out before she could swallow it. The mounted men shifted, horses stamping and snorting as if sound alone gave them ownership. Then the gate bars groaned. Not opening fully, only enough for a tall figure to step through under the torch bracket, wrapped in dark leather and a wolf fur mantle silvered at the shoulders by rain. Cale Wildfire descended the short stairs from the inner yard with the controlled stillness of a predator deciding whether to strike. His face was carved in severity, his mouth a flat line that made it clear petitioners were usually dismissed before they finished kneeling. Stories said he had outlived 2 generations of rival alphas and never once bent law for pity. "State your claim," he said. Evangeline forced herself upright on shaking arms and held out the moonstone token in both hands like an offering. "Evangeline Ravencrest, widow of Thorn Ravencrest, slain 3 moons ago, I request sanctuary under blood and birth law for myself and my child." Kale's gaze flicked to the token, to the blood on her cloak, to her belly tightened hard under wet fabric as another pain hit. He should have refused. Everyone on that slope knew he should have refused. Wildfire neutrality had kept his borders intact. Taking her meant choosing a side in a war already drawing teeth. From behind the riders, the Varen captain raised his voice. "Alpha, do not inherit this nuisance. Her pack is ash. Her claim is dead. Hand her over and we ride." Kale did not look at him. He stepped closer to Evangeline, close enough that she caught cedar smoke and cold metal beneath the rain. Then he froze. The change was small but unmistakable. A catch in breath, a tightening through his shoulders as her scent reached him fully. Heat and milk and fear and storm. Grief worn like skin. Something else beneath it, old as moonrise. His eyes, a hard amber moments earlier, deepened as if lit from within. For the first time that night, silence spread wider than thunder. At the top of the stair behind him stood Ilara Wildfire in ceremonial blue, dark hair braided with house silver, the woman every court tongue had already named future Luna by rank and proximity. She saw the pause. She saw Kale looking at Evangeline as if struck by an unseen force. From where Evangeline knelt, Ilara's face went very still, the kind of court stillness that signaled a fracture line opening in protocol. Kale lifted one hand without turning. "Gate captain, bring her in." The Varen rider lurched forward in the saddle. "She is under claimant seal." Kale finally gave him his attention, and the temperature in the rain seemed to drop. "You sound confused about where you are." "This can be appealed to council." "Appeal what you like, from the road." Kale's voice stayed quiet, which made it worse. "Cross this threshold tonight and you will lose more than paperwork." The guard seized Evangeline under the elbow as the gate opened wider. She stumbled once at the lip of stone, then made it inside just before the bars slammed shut and iron dropped into place. Outside, the captain shouted threats that blurred with thunder. Inside, torchlight turned the wet courtyard to bronze and shadow. Evangeline's knees buckled at last. As she collapsed, she looked up once and saw Ilara still on the stairs, watching her with a court smile so slight it was almost kind. The look in her eyes was not kind at all. It was calculation sharpened to a point. Evangeline understood it instantly with the instinct of prey that had survived too long. Dawn had not come yet, and already someone inside these walls had decided she and her child were a problem to solve. 6 hours earlier, she had still believed hiding could buy time. She had been sheltering in an abandoned shrine above the river switchbacks, a one-room stone husk with a cracked moon carving, and a door that hung crooked on one hinge. At dusk, she had bartered her last silver ring to a passing trader for bread, dried nettle tea, and a rumor that wildfire territory remained neutral ground if she reached it before winter snows closed the high road. She had eaten half a crust, wrapped the rest in cloth, and tried to sleep sitting up with her back to the altar stone. The first sign was the dogs. Not barking. Whining low outside the wall, then abruptly silent. She woke to bootsteps and lantern glare slicing through the door gap. 4 men entered without knocking, rain on their shoulders, Varen colors hidden under plain travel cloaks. The tallest kicked the bread bundle across the floor and looked at her belly with open contempt. "There she is," he said. "The little investment." Evangeline stood slowly, one hand behind her on the altar for balance. "This shrine is neutral ground." He laughed. "Neutral ended when your alpha died." Another man circled toward the rear window slit, cutting off escape. "House Varen can be generous," he said. "You come quietly, you get warm rooms and attendants. Keep resisting, and we transport you like cargo. I am not yours to transport. The tallest man shrugged. Child is what matters. Widow is incidental. Incidental. The word hollowed her out more than any threat. They did not need to kill her to erase her. They only needed to rename her until she vanished inside their language. A cramp seized her then, sudden and deep. She folded at the waist and clutched the altar edge. The men exchanged glances that were not concern, only logistics. Too early, one muttered. Then move her now, said the tall one. If labor starts on the road, chain the wrists and keep going. That was the moment she stopped waiting for mercy from men who spoke in ledgers. She grabbed the brass oil dish from the altar and flung it into the nearest lantern. Flame burst up the cloak of the man by the door in a bright, brief blossom. He cursed and stumbled back, swatting sparks. Smoke knifed through the room. Evangeline shoved the rear shutter with both hands until rotten wood gave way, then forced herself through the narrow opening, stones scraping skin from her hips and shoulders. She hit mud outside, rolled, and ran. Branches whipped her face. Her left shoe tore at the heel and filled with cold water. Behind her came shouting, then the horn call she would hear for the rest of the night, each blast measuring the distance between hunter and hunted. She did not run cleanly. She staggered, caught herself, kept moving with one hand braced under her belly as if she could hold the child higher by force of will. By midnight she reached the ridge where the path split, west toward deep ravines and slow starvation, north toward wildfire borders and a chance that ended either in sanctuary or execution. Lightning forked over the mountains, illuminating the basalt causeway in the distance, black against white spray. She pressed the moonstone token to her lips once, and chose north. Now, inside Kale Wildfire's gate with the storm hammering the walls, she understood the cost of that choice had only begun to unfold. Hands caught her under the arms as Stone rushed up to meet her. The guard who had pulled her through the gate cursed under his breath when he felt how hard her body shook, then shouted for the infirmary. Boots struck wet flagstones from 3 directions. Torchlight wavered across helmets, wolfskin cloaks, rain-dark braids, faces narrowed by caution rather than cruelty. Wildfire warriors formed a wall at the gate as the Varen men pounded iron from outside, their voices turning muffled and distant behind oak and metal. Inside the courtyard, authority moved in clean lines. No one panicked. No one soothed her with false promises either. They moved as if this was war, and she was now inside its geometry. Kale did not touch her at first. He watched while 2 women in healer gray knelt to check the blood on her skirt and the pulse in her throat. Water streamed from his hair along the sharp angle of his jaw, yet he stood perfectly still, a dark figure cut from the same basalt as the fortress walls. When one healer looked up and said, "Labor signs, early and irregular," his gaze snapped to Evangeline's face with a focus that felt almost invasive, as if he could read the fracture points in her by scent alone. Ilara came down the stairs slowly, never slipping despite the rain. "Alpha," she said, her tone smooth enough to pass for concern. "If this becomes a blood-right dispute, we should isolate her until council review. Neutrality has held this court together for decades." Evangeline almost laughed, because she was bent double and nauseous and close to fainting, and still she recognized a polished knife when she heard one. Isolate her? Remove her from witnesses. Rename that as procedure. Kale did not look at Ilara. Neutrality is not a license to discard old law. Old law can collapse a throne if rivals weaponize it. That risk is mine. The words landed like dropped stone. Around them, shoulders stiffened, heads lowered, calculations rewritten in real time. Ilara's expression did not break, but the silence after his answer stretched too long for courtesy. She dipped her head in a tiny bow and stepped back half a pace, yielding position without surrendering intent. Another contraction knifed through Evangeline's pelvis. She grabbed blindly and found leather, a bracer hard under her fingers. Kale moved then, swift and precise, catching her without crowding her. "Can you walk?" he asked. She wanted to spit out yes from sheer pride. Her knees gave her another answer. "Carry her," he ordered. The same guard who had first reached her bent and lifted her as if she weighed nothing, though pain still dragged a broken sound from her throat. Kale walked beside them through the inner archway, not ahead like a ruler granting audience, beside them like a sentry escorting what he had already decided to protect. Evangeline watched the corridor swing past in jolts of torchlight and shadow. Carved lintels blackened with age, iron braziers breathing cedar smoke, old battle standards stitched with a running wolf under a crescent moon. Fortress, not palace. Function over display. Yet everywhere she looked, people paused and stared. Some stared at her belly, some at the blood, most at Kale. Her mind kept trying to map exits, blind corners, weapon racks. Trauma had remade thought into a survival ledger, and the entries came fast, almost detached. Door to the right, barred from outside. 2 guards at each stair. Women in healer gray carry blades in sleeve sheaths. Alara is not done. The child kicks. Stay awake. Stay awake. If they separate mother from daughter, fight with teeth if hands fail. Say the law out loud. Make witnesses. Do not disappear quietly. Grief can wait. Panic can wait. Breathe now. Count now. Live through this corridor first. They passed through a long gallery open to the inner yard. Rain blew in cold sheets through stone arches, carrying the mountain scent of wet pine and lichen and distant snowmelt. The storm outside had not broken. It had only found new walls to strike. Far above, wolves answered thunder with low, carrying calls from the ramparts, not frantic howls but disciplined signals that marked watch changes. Wildfire did not sleep through danger. At the infirmary threshold, the chief healer met them with hands already gloved in oiled linen. She was broad-shouldered and silver-haired, her face lined by weather and command, and she looked at Kale first as if confirming chain of authority. "Name?" she asked Evangeline while attendants cut away soaked fabric. "Evangeline Ravencrest." "Gestation?" "7 months and some days." "Any prior difficult labor?" "First child." The healer pressed her lips tight, then nodded toward a bed screened by woven reed panels. "She gets heat stones, willow bark, close watch. No induction herbs unless I authorize. No one enters without my leave." Alara had followed them as far as the door. "I should remain," she said, "for court record and witness." The healer did not blink. "You can witness from the hall." Alara's gaze slid past her to Evangeline, cool and searching. "Widow Ravencrest, this court values order. Cooperate, and no one will mistreat you." Evangeline's laugh came out ragged. "I have been offered cooperation all week. It always meant a cage." A thin flush touched Alara's cheekbones. "You are not in a position to make demands." Kyle turned his head, and something ancient looked out through his eyes, predatory and controlled. "She made one demand, sanctuary. I granted it. Leave." Ilara held his gaze 2 heartbeats too long, then retreated, skirts whispering against stone. At the corner she paused and glanced back once, the look so brief most would miss it. Not grief, not anger alone, strategy recalibrating. The infirmary doors shut behind her. The sound was wooden, ordinary, and final enough to make Evangeline's throat tighten. Heat returned to her hands by degrees as attendants rubbed them, wrapped her in dry wool, and tucked warmed stones along her hips. The chief healer, who introduced herself as Mira, checked the child's position and frowned at the tension in Evangeline's abdomen. "Your body is trying to start and stop at once," Mira said quietly. "Fear can do that. Exhaustion can do that. So can pursuit over hard ground in a storm. Can I keep her in? Evangeline asked. Please. We are going to try. Cale remained near the foot of the bed, close enough to intervene, far enough to avoid cornering her. He had removed his soaked mantle, revealing a fitted dark tunic crossed by old scars at the throat and collarbone. He looked less ceremonial without fur and silver, more dangerous for how little he needed to signal power. Mira gave him a pointed look. If you stand there like a drawn blade, she will never settle. His mouth twitched as if he understood the rebuke. Would you prefer I leave? Evangeline answered before she weighed the risk. No. The words startled both of them. Pain built again, slower this time, rolling from spine to front in a heavy band that stole breath. Her fingers locked on the blanket. Mira moved to brace her shoulder, then glanced at Cale. She needs grounding. Lower abdomen support from outside pressure can help if she consents. Cale's attention sharpened on Evangeline, waiting. She nodded once. He came to the bedside and knelt, not touching until she reached for him with a trembling hand. When his palm settled over the taut curve beneath her navel, the room changed with brutal suddenness. White heat flared under his hand, not burning, not pain, but a force bright enough that Evangeline gasped and arched. A current raced up her spine and down her arms. The child struck hard from within, one decisive kick against Cale's palm, and light answered it. Thin, luminous threads spilled across their skin, winding from her wrist to his like spun moonfire, then tightening in pulses that matched her heartbeat and another beat beneath it. Mira swore softly and stepped back. One attendant dropped a cloth basin with a metallic crack. Scent flooded the room, impossible to mistake even through herbs and smoke. Winter pine after first frost, silver rain on stone, the rare Bond signature old songs called Oath Weather. Evangeline had heard elders mention it once with the awe reserved for extinct things. She had never believed she would breathe it. Kyle's sharp intake of breath was almost a growl. Amber bled into his irises until they looked lit from the core, predator and man aligned without fracture. He stared at the threads binding their wrists as if seeing his own name written in a language he had forgotten. Then he lowered his head and dropped fully to one knee beside her bed, hand still over her child, shoulders bowed not in weakness but in reverence stripped bare. Mine, he said, voice roughened by something centuries deep, finally breaking open. By moon and marrow, if you will have it. Chaos detonated through Evangeline. Grief rose first, hot and savage, because she had buried a mate and still woke tasting ash from his pyre. Fear followed, old and practical. Alpha promises could become prison walls when politics tightened. Yet under both, a low thrum built in her chest, an answering recognition too precise to deny. Her instincts sharpened until every sound in the infirmary stood out separately. Cloth rustle, fire hiss, Mira's stunned breathing, rain striking shutters in uneven bursts, and beneath all of it, her daughter moved again, calmer now, as if settling toward a familiar rhythm she had chosen without asking permission from history or propriety. Evangeline lifted her gaze to Cale's face. No triumph there. No hunger to possess what was vulnerable. Only shock, devotion, and a fear that matched her own. That one wrong move would shatter something sacred newly formed. Do not lie to me, she whispered. I will not. You do not know me. I know enough. The threads at their wrists pulsed brighter, then steadied, neither fading nor tightening further, as if waiting on the one thing power could not force. Consent, trust, time. Evangeline's breath hitched. She should pull away. She should guard what remained of herself behind stone and law. Instead, her fingers turned in his grip, not surrendering, simply aligning, palm to palm over the life inside her as thunder rolled beyond fortress walls, and the whole world narrowed to that locked, unflinching gaze. The threads of light dimmed to a soft gleam and settled against their skin like living bracelets. Mira recovered first, sharp voice cutting through the hush as she waved attendants back to their work. But even she handled Evangeline as if touching a relic dug from sacred ground. Cale remained kneeling until Evangeline's breathing steadied. Only then did he draw his hand away, slowly, letting the contact break in her control rather than his. She expected him to claim the room, the law, her body, something. Alpha's turned revelation into command. She had lived long enough among powerful men to mistake entitlement for custom and coercion for courtship. Cale stood and took 2 deliberate steps back. "No one speaks of what happened here without her permission," he said, gaze sweeping the healers. "Any report goes through me." Mira folded her arms. "I report to survival first." A shadow of respect moved across his face. "Then we agree." He unbuckled the dagger at his hip and set it on a side table, then the second blade from the back of his belt, then the short throwing knife hidden at his wrist. Metal touched wood, one clean sound after another. He laid out every weapon where Evangeline could see them and lifted both empty hands. "I can invoke bond privilege tonight," he said to her, voice low and even. "It would place sentries inside this room and bind your care directly to my authority. It would also remove your right to refuse my presence until birth. I will not do that, unless you ask." Surprise cut through her exhaustion so sharply it almost hurt. She had braced for a velvet cage. What he offered instead was choice, and choice felt more dangerous because she had forgotten what it weighed. Mira pressed a warm cup into Evangeline's hands. "Willow bark. Sip. Do not gulp." Evangeline held the cup but did not drink yet. Her mind moved in fast, jagged loops, survival logic colliding with the white glow still circling her wrist. If she accepted his protection, she gave him leverage. If she refused it, she gambled her daughter against a court already measuring her worth by lineage and convenience. Her thoughts turned inward, fierce and immediate. "I am awake. I am here. I do not owe trust because fate glowed on my skin. I do not owe fear because men in silk say I should kneel. I can choose one breath at a time. I can choose this room. I can choose who touches me. I can still say Thorn's name without betraying him. Grief is not disloyalty. Survival is not betrayal. The child does not need a perfect mother. She needs a living one. If this male lies, I will learn it. If he tells truth, I will learn that too. I will not hand over my will to either terror or longing. I will choose." "Outside sentries only," she said at last. "No one comes in without Mira's leave, not even you." His answer came without pause. "Done." "And no bond rights without consent." "Done." Mira gave a grunt that might have been approval. She adjusted blankets around Evangeline's legs, then pointed toward the door with her chin. "Alpha, if you are staying, sit where she can see you and do not loom." Something that could almost have been humor touched Cale's mouth. "I have been accused of many things. Looming is accurate." He took the plain wooden chair near the hearth instead of the carved one beside her bed. Rain struck the shutters in uneven bursts, wind threading through stone seams with a low whistle. The infirmary smelled of herbs, wool, and banked coals. Every few minutes pain cinched her from within, then loosened, unpredictable, but no longer escalating. Cale did not fill the quiet with speeches. He watched the fire, rose only when Mira asked for more heat stones, and returned to the same chair each time. By the second bell after midnight, exhaustion dragged Evangeline under in fragments rather than sleep. She drifted, surfaced, drifted again. The nightmare found her anyway. Hands at her wrists, iron biting skin. The old shrine wall collapsing inward with lantern smoke. someone laughing while she begged to be seen as human, and heard herself called cargo, investment, vessel. Then Thorne's face, as she had last seen it, ash gray, still, eyes closed while men argued over treaty clauses beside his pyre. She came awake with a strangled cry and both arms slashing through air. A basin crashed. One of Mira's attendants startled backward. Cale was already on his feet, but he stopped at the edge of the bed and did not touch her. "Evangeline," he said, "look at me." Her breath came in ragged pulls. She bared her teeth without meaning to, every muscle rigid for flight that had nowhere to go. He lowered himself to the floor beside the bed instead of towering over her, then reached up to unfasten the leather harness across his chest. Buckles clicked softly. He set the harness aside, then stripped off bracers and placed them with his weapons, each movement visible, unhurried. "I am armed less than the healer now," he said. "You are safe." Mira muttered, "Debatable, but comforting." The dry edge of it startled a weak, broken sound from Evangeline that might have been a laugh. Her pulse still raced. Kyle rested his forearms on his knees and kept his gaze level with hers. "You can rage," he said. "You can curse this place and me with it. You can say his name." The last words hit hardest. No jealousy, no demand to replace memory with devotion. She pressed her fist to her mouth, then dropped it and forced the syllables out. "Thorne." The name cracked in the center. Tears came hot and abrupt, not graceful grief, but ugly sobs that shook her shoulders and stole language. She hated crying in front of witnesses, hated the vulnerability of it, hated that relief rode alongside shame because someone had finally made room for the dead instead of competing with him. Cale waited until the worst of it passed. "When I was younger," he said quietly, "I led a northern campaign in a winter so hard the river froze from bank to bank. I believed speed would save us. It got 12 of my warriors caught in a whiteout and buried before we reached them." His jaw tightened once. "I hear their names when storms hit the walls. I still count to 12 before sleep." Evangeline stared at him through damp lashes. Leaders told stories of victories, never failures that left bone-deep scars. "Why tell me that?" "Because grief does not leave when ordered. Because command did not make me less afraid of failing those in my care. Because I will not ask you to heal by pretending." The words settled in the room like weight placed on a shaking table, steadying what threatened to collapse. Her breathing eased by degrees. She nodded once. Permission finally given. Kyle rose and offered his hand. When she took it, he only helped her drink water and adjust the blanket. No claim. No pressure. He returned to the floor rather than the bed, back against the stone wall, and stayed there until her eyes closed again. At dawn, the storm broke into a fine silver rain. Pale light seeped through the shutters, turning the infirmary walls the color of wet ash. Evangeline woke to the feel of fingers in her hair and tensed, then saw Cale beside the bed with a length of dark ribbon and a comb that looked comically delicate in his scarred hands. "Mira said braiding reduces neck strain during contractions," he said, almost formal. "May I?" She blinked at him. "You know how." "I had sisters. They did not trust anyone else with festival knots." Against all expectation, he was careful. He separated damp strands, smoothed tangles with patient passes, then wove 3 tight sections into an old protective pattern that crossed at the nape and looped back on itself. Wolf knot for honored mothers. She recognized it from childhood ceremonies where elder females were blessed before winter births. She had never expected to wear one again, least of all by an alpha's hand. When he tied it off, Mira made a satisfied noise and shooed attendants to open the doors for morning rounds. 2 junior nobles arrived with messages for the healer, halted at the threshold, and stared. Their expressions performed a full arc from curiosity to disbelief to thinly veiled disdain as they took in Cale at Evangeline's bedside, ribbon between his fingers. One whispered, not quite quietly enough, "He braids strays now." Cale did not raise his voice. "Say that again, with your full name." The noble blanched and bowed so low his forehead nearly met the lintel. "Forgive me, Alpha." "Ask her forgiveness. You insulted her." The words came out of the young man like stones forced through a narrow gate. Evangeline accepted with a nod she barely felt. After they fled, she looked at Kyle for a long moment, uncertain what frightened her more, the breadth of his power or the precision with which he used it. 3 days passed before she was strong enough to leave the infirmary for a formal meal in the lower court hall, and by then the fortress had reshaped itself around rumor. Wherever she walked, conversations thinned. Some faces softened with genuine concern. Others sharpened with appraisal. She wore a plain charcoal gown Mira had insisted on, and over it a borrowed wrap that smelled faintly of cedar smoke and Cale's skin. The hall itself was carved directly into the mountain, long tables flanking a central fire trench, banners hanging from black beams high above. Rain hissed beyond the arrow slits. Servants moved in practiced arcs with bowls of venison stew, barley bread, winter greens. Evangeline took the seat Mira indicated midway down the high table, neither hidden nor honored. Deliberate positioning, visible, testable. Ilara entered last in moon blue silk and house silver, composure flawless. She greeted elders by name, touched hands, smiled at children. When she reached Evangeline's side, she paused with polished courtesy. "Widow Ravencrest," she said, "I trust the infirmary met your standards." Evangeline folded her napkin once and set it beside her bowl. "I had no standards left when I arrived. Your healer gave me some back." A flicker crossed Ilara's eyes. How moving. The first half of the meal passed under brittle civility. Then an elder from the eastern ridges asked, too loudly, whether sanctuary law should apply when paternity of an heir could be contested by multiple houses. Murmurs followed. A woman near the end of the table added, "The child may be useful, of course, but usefulness is not legitimacy." Someone else, bolder after ale, used the phrase breeding vessel as if discussing livestock weights. Heat surged through Evangeline's chest. She kept her spine straight by force and stared at the fire trench until the stones blurred. Ilara rose with a measured rustle of silk. "For stability," she said, projecting to the full hall, "I propose temporary noble guardianship at birth until celestial records confirm bloodline integrity. It protects the court from uncertainty and the mother from stress." There it was, polished into policy. Take the child. Call it kindness. Chairs scraped. Voices climbed. Cale had been conferring with captains near the dais. Now he moved, and the sound in the hall dropped as if cut with a blade. He stopped behind Evangeline's chair, one hand braced lightly on its carved back. His pupils shifted, the predator surfacing beneath controlled features. Amber lit his gaze. "No," he said. Ilara kept her smile, but strain showed at its edges. "Alpha, I am offering procedure, not insult." "You insulted her before witnesses." He unclasped his heavy black cloak and settled it over Evangeline's shoulders with deliberate care, the fabric warm from his body. "Hear me under pack law. This female is under Alpha Sanctuary. Mother and child are one claim. Any challenge to either is a challenge to my throat." Silence crashed through the room. Even the fire seemed to hush. An elder cleared his throat. "That is old war phrasing." Cale turned his head without removing his hand from Evangeline's chair. "Then remember why it exists." Ilara's composure finally fractured. "You would jeopardize succession over a widow you met in a storm." Cale's answer came iron flat. "I would burn my own title before I let this court turn refuge into theft." The hall held still, weighing him, weighing her, weighing what future would follow whichever law survived the night. Evangeline felt every gaze and did not lower her head. Cale's cloak settled around her like a boundary line drawn in wool and authority, but what steadied her was not the threat in his words. It was the order beneath them. He had not spoken over her to erase her. He had spoken to stop others from doing it. She lifted her chin and met Ilara's stare. "My daughter is not a vacancy in your lineage chart." Ilara's mouth tightened. "You presume much." "I remember everything," Evangeline said, voice calm now, almost quiet. "Especially who calls theft protection." Cale's fingers tapped once against the chair, a private signal of approval she felt more than saw. Around them, nobles looked away first. The current in the room had shifted, not to safety yet, but to a new balance where she was no longer prey-cornered in borrowed walls. When the meal ended, Cale offered his arm. Evangeline hesitated only a breath before taking it. Her guard did not vanish. It lowered one notch, enough to let warmth in beside caution as they crossed the hall together under watching eyes. As they crossed the hall together under watching eyes, Evangeline felt the weight of Cale's arm as both shield and question. His stride stayed measured, giving her time to match him even with the drag of early labor in her hips, and she hated how much that small consideration mattered. At the doors, a court scribe in ash-gray robes stepped into their path and bowed low enough that his braid brushed the stone. "Alpha, Lady Ilara petitions immediate review under Celestial Succession Code. She requests the mother present for record." Cale's jaw hardened. "At this hour?" "Council elders are assembled already." Evangeline turned her head. Ilara stood at the far end of the corridor between two torch brackets, posture immaculate, a folio clasped in both hands as if she carried scripture instead of strategy. She did not approach. She waited for protocol to pull Evangeline toward her. "Take me," Evangeline said quietly. Cale looked down at her, warning in his gaze. "You are exhausted. And if I refuse, she writes refusal into law by morning." He held her eyes for one long beat, then gave a single nod. "We go together." The record chamber had no windows, only tiers of shelves and a moonstone table worn smooth by generations of signatures. 6 elders sat in a crescent, faces carved from habit and caution. Ilara placed the folio at the center and opened it with careful hands, revealing charts marked with silver ink and house seals pressed in dark blue wax. "Celestial archives are clear," she said, voice calm enough to pass for duty. "A white wolf birth during an eclipse cycle indicates a fracture event unless guided by sanctioned guardians. In such cases, temporary transfer safeguards pack continuity." Murmurs passed along the elders. One leaned forward. "White wolf is rare, not forbidden." "Rare enough to destroy unprepared courts," Ilara answered. "History records 3 collapses tied to unsanctioned maternal claims." Evangeline stepped closer to the table. The page smelled wrong. Fresh resin, not archive dust. Her gaze slid over the script, and her pulse kicked when she saw the final attestation line. "Archivist Elin Vero," she read, with a date from 2 winters ago. She had met Eileen once at Ravencrest Treaty season, an old male with a left-handed slant so distinct his letters climbed uphill like ivy. This signature angled right. She lifted her chin. "Your witness wrote with the wrong hand." Ilara's expression did not move. "Grief can distort memory." Cale touched the page, rubbed the ink between finger and thumb, then held his stained skin up to the nearest torch. "It is not fully set." Silence spread, sharp and thin. Ilara drew a breath through her nose. The copy was refreshed for readability. "From what original?" Cale asked. "And where is it kept?" "In sealed archives." "Then we open them now." A crack appeared in Ilara's composure, tiny but real. "That process requires dawn clerks and full council quorum." Cale's voice went softer. which made every elder sit straighter. Then your petition waits. One elder cleared his throat. For caution, we can assign noble supervised midwives until verification. Evangeline felt the floor tilt under her feet, not from pain this time, but from the precision of the trap. Ilara did not need total victory tonight. She only needed one legal foothold inside the berth. Kale answered first. Mira remains chief. Any additional hands are chosen by her, not by court faction. Ilara closed the folio and bowed to the elders, control sliding back over her features like lacquer over wood. As the Alpha commands. When they left the chamber, Kale did not speak until the heavy door shut behind them. You saw the signature. I saw the date too, Evangeline said. 2 winters ago, but the parchment edge is clean cut. Not archived, not handled, not old. He turned toward her fully, admiration and anger braided tight in his face. She expected fear to keep you from reading. She expected me to be tired and grateful and quiet. He gave a humorless breath. She will not make that mistake again. By the time the fortress bells marked midnight, rain had thinned to a fine mist, and the mountain cold settled into the stone like a second skeleton. Kyle escorted Evangeline back to the infirmary wing, then dismissed every guard except 2 at the outer arch. Inside, the corridor lamps burned low, painting long bands of amber across the floor. Mira met them at the door with a look that said she had already heard enough to be furious for everyone in the room. Court politics in a labor week, she muttered. Brilliant. Sit. Evangeline sank onto the bed while Mira checked her pulse and belly with brisk, practiced hands. Contractions are still irregular, the healer said. Strong, then quiet. Child remains high. That is good. Stress is not. Kale stayed near the hearth, watching without hovering, his presence a steady pressure she felt even when she kept her eyes on the blanket seam. Attraction had become its own threat, not because it felt false, but because it felt possible. Possible meant breakable. I am so tired of choosing between fear and need. I am still standing in a burned shrine, still hearing boots at the door, still clutching stone and telling myself I can run 1 more mile. Yet my body leans toward him when he enters a room. My pulse settles when he speaks my name without ownership sharpened into command. If I trust this, I risk being wrong in the one place that will ruin my daughter and me. If I refuse this, I fight alone while enemies draft laws around my throat. I want certainty. There is none. There is only pattern, action, consequence. He asks. He waits. He keeps his word in small moments no one applauds. For now, that is the only ground I have. Mira finished her examination and straightened. I requested 2 additional midwives from the lower quarter. I got reassigned personnel from Noble Registry instead. Her mouth flattened. Lisa and Bryn, competent on paper. Unknown to me. Kyle's gaze sharpened. Who issued the reassignment? House office stamped it. Mira did not need to say whose house. A low thrum built in Evangeline's chest, instinct warning her long before reason finished the equation. Do not let them give me anything in a cup I did not see poured. Mira nodded once. Agreed. Kale moved to the bed, stopping where Evangeline could refuse him if she chose. I will place Rook at this door and Taryn at the south stair. They are mine, not Council's. Do it, Mira said. And sleep somewhere within shouting distance. His mouth almost curved. I suspect that order applies to everyone. He left only long enough to set the guard rotation. When he returned, he carried a carved wooden wolf no bigger than his palm, polished smooth by years of handling. He set it on the bedside table, almost awkward. My youngest sister kept this through fever season, he said. Mira used to threaten confiscation when she refused medicine. Mira snorted. I never threatened. I confiscated. Evangeline touched the small carving with one finger. A ridiculous gift in a night of forged law and predatory smiles, and that was exactly why her throat tightened. "Thank you," she said. "Rest," Kale answered. The lamps burned lower. Somewhere down the corridor, footsteps paused, then moved on. From beneath the floor, Evangeline caught a faint metallic tang she had not noticed before, like cold iron struck against wet stone. It did not belong to herbs or hearth smoke. She looked toward Mira, and the healer's eyes narrowed as if she smelled it too. 3 hours passed before the first true strike landed. Lysa arrived carrying a steaming cup and an apology practiced smooth. "For pain and sleep," she said. "Senior healer's instruction." Mira took the cup, inhaled, and went still. "This contains black cohosh and red rue." Lysa blinked. "A calming blend." "It is an induction blend." Mira set the cup down with dangerous care. "Who told you to administer this?" Bryn appeared in the doorway behind her, hands raised in placation. "There was urgency from Council. Eclipse window protocols. Maternal stabilization." Mira's voice cracked like a whip. "Out." Lysa hesitated, then reached for Evangeline's wrist with forced gentleness. "You are in no condition to refuse regulated care." Kale entered at that exact moment, shoulders filling the doorway, amber bleeding into his irises as he took in the scene, the cup, the two unfamiliar midwives flanking the bed. "No one touches her," he said. Bryn found his courage in borrowed authority. "Alpha, we carry Council directive under Celestial Risk Statute." He held out a folded order with 3 elder seals and Alara's witness mark. Kale read it once, expression flattening into something colder than anger. "Temporary transfer to the lunar birthing chamber," he said, "for observation during eclipse onset." His gaze lifted. "You moved this through while verification was pending." Bryn swallowed. "Legally executed." Another contraction hit Evangeline hard enough to bend her forward. Mira braced her shoulders, counting breaths, and frowned at the sudden intensity. "This pattern changed too fast," she muttered. "Something is driving it." The metallic smell sharpened. Kyle dropped to one knee and pressed his palm to the flagstones beside the bed. A pulse answered from below, faint but deliberate, runic energy threaded through iron. "Moon iron lattice," he said, voice low with controlled fury, "under the chamber floor." Mira stared. "That suppresses first shift response." "And maternal bond amplification," Evangeline whispered, understanding arriving like ice water down her spine. "They do not want me strong, they want me compliant." Kale rose in one fluid motion. "Rook, seal this wing, no one in or out." Bootsteps thundered away. Bryn backed toward the door. "If you obstruct council order, they can censure the throne." Kale took one step forward, and both midwives froze. "Tell council this. Legal language does not sanctify sabotage." From the corridor came a new sound, measured and terrible in its calm. Ilara's voice carrying through stone. "Move her now. If labor advances outside protocol, the child standing becomes contested." Guards answered with uncertainty, chain of command splitting in real time. Mira gripped Evangeline's hand while another contraction seized and held, longer now, deeper. "Stay with me," she said. "Breathe down. Good. Again." Evangeline clung to Mira's voice and looked at Kyle, who stood between her bed and the door like a drawn line no one had crossed yet. The bond at her wrist flared, white threads brightening as pressure mounted from floor, law, and blood all at once. Outside, bolts slammed, orders collided. Somewhere beneath them, moon iron runes awakened in a grinding hum that vibrated through the bedframe and into her bones, and the fortress that had taken her in began to divide around her. The hum under the floor deepened until the water in Mira's basin rippled in tight circles. Evangeline felt it in her teeth, in the base of her spine, in the child tucked high and stubborn beneath her ribs. It was not ordinary magic. It was engineered pressure, tuned to a body already straining toward birth. The infirmary doors slammed open. Alara stepped through in moon-blue silk with 4 council guards behind her and 2 elders at her shoulder, all carrying the brittle authority of people who had convinced themselves procedure could excuse anything. "By sealed directive," she said, lifting the order Bryn had carried. "The mother is transferred to the lunar birthing chamber until eclipse completion. Alpha, stand down." Kale did not move from the center line between Evangeline's bed and the doorway. Directive based on forged records and poisoned care. Ilara's expression sharpened. Accusation is not proof. Mira snatched the rejected cup from the table and held it up. "Induction herbs, concentrated, administered without my consent. That is proof of malpractice before witnesses." One elder flinched, then recovered. "This is no time for healer disputes. If a white birth manifests without safeguards—" "Stop calling my child a manifest," Evangeline said, voice raw but cutting clean through the room. Another contraction seized her, harder, and she folded forward with a low cry. Alara seized the moment. "You hear her. She is unstable. Remove her now." 2 guards shifted toward the bed. Kale's growl stopped them where they stood, low enough that the braziers seemed to shiver in answer. "Try it." For one perilous heartbeat, no one breathed. Then the first lock on the outer corridor gave with a crack, followed by shouting from both directions as Kale's sentries and councilmen collided at the archway. Steel rang once, then again. Not slaughter, not frenzy, but the sharp chaos of loyalties splitting inside one fortress. Evangeline clutched the blanket in both fists and fought for air. The bond light at her wrist flared white, then thinned, then flared again, struggling against the moon-iron vibration crawling through stone. Mira pressed both palms to Evangeline's abdomen and swore softly. "She is being forced into transition labor," the healer said. "If this continues in a closed room, both could crash." Kale's head snapped toward her. "Solution." Mira met his gaze without yielding. "Open witness chamber. Now. If they want law, give them law in public where no one can rewrite what happened." Ilara's control slipped for the first time. "Absolutely not. The tribunal is for elders only." Evangeline lifted her head through pain and looked directly at Ilara. She tasted fear, iron, rage, and something steadier beneath all 3. "Then you can explain your remedies in front of the pack." Ilara took a step closer, voice dropping to a private hiss. "You think public sympathy protects you? It won't. When this child is born under eclipse sign, she belongs to structure, not sentiment." "Structure," Evangeline whispered, "is just the word you use when you want to steal cleanly." Kale turned and barked an order through the doorway to Rook and Taren. "Clear the Moon Tribunal Hall. Every rank, every witness, seal the exits." The elder on Ilara's right blanched. "You cannot—" "I can," Kyle said. "And I just did." By the time they moved Evangeline onto a wheeled birthing frame, the fortress bells had begun the eclipse count. Slow bronze strikes rolling through stone passages like a warning from the mountain itself. Kale walked on one side, Mira on the other. Ilara followed with the elders and the council guards, clutching legality like a blade she still believed would cut deeper than truth. The tribunal hall sat beneath the sacred ridge, circular and stark, ringed by tiered benches and a central moon altar carved with old pack law. By the second bell of eclipse, the chamber was full. Warriors in wet cloaks, kitchen workers with flour on their sleeves, scribes, scouts, apprentices, elders, all dragged from sleep and rank into one collective witness. Murmurs ricocheted under the domed ceiling as Evangeline was rolled to the altar's edge. The moment her frame crossed the inner ring, moon iron chains erupted from slots in the stone floor with a shower of pale sparks, snapping into a lattice around the birthing space. Gasps broke out across the hall. Kale wheeled on Alara. You laid restraints in sacred stone. Alara held his stare. Containment safeguards, approved for anomalous births. By whom? By those who still care whether this court survives you. A contraction hit like a rift opening through Evangeline's pelvis. Mira and two loyal healers moved fast, voices steady, hands sure. The world narrowed to breath counts, pressure, heat, the brutal rhythm of body over politics. Kale dropped to one knee beside the frame, jaw tight enough to crack. "Stay behind me," he said, pitched only for her. She looked at him, at the chains, at Ilara, at the tiered rows of faces hungry for certainty. Then she looked inward, where terror and resolve had stopped being opposites. I am not a petition anymore. I am not a widow waiting for kinder hands. I am in pain, and I am still choosing. They built this room to separate mother from child, law from mercy, truth from record. If I stay still, they will call stillness consent. If I hide behind him, they will call me weak and write it into precedent. I am shaken, yes. I am grieving, yes. I am also done. This is my daughter. This is my voice. This is the line. When the next contraction broke, she bore down with a sound that tore from the center of her chest. Mira guided. The healer team moved in practiced arcs despite the chain's glow and the chamber's panic. Minutes stretched and snapped. Then a sharp newborn cry cut through the hall, clear as struck glass. Evangeline sobbed once in relief before she even saw her. Mira lifted a small, furious, perfect infant slick with birth and wrapped her in warmed cloth. White down already showed at the crown, bright as winter milk under torchlight. The hall erupted in shouts, prayers, startled curses. Kale's eyes went feral with awe. He reached, but Alara moved first. With startling speed, she took the bundled child from Mira's arms and stepped back behind the moon iron line, where hidden runes flared up her sleeves in silver veins. "By Eclipse authority," she declared, voice ringing. "The heir transfers to noble guardianship pending maternal competency review." "Give her back," Evangeline said. No scream this time. Just iron. Alara raised a ceremonial dagger, its edge angled near the blanket, not touching skin, but close enough to freeze every body in the hall. No one comes closer. Kale surged up, and half the room surged with him. He threw one arm out, stopping his own guards before they could rush and trigger catastrophe. His gaze never left Alara. "Stand down." Alara's laugh cracked. "You chose her over blood rank. You chose chaos over crown." Evangeline swung her legs off the birthing frame. Mira grabbed for her, horrified. "You just delivered. Do not stand." But Evangeline stood anyway, swaying once, then bracing. Moon iron chains spat light around her ankles. Kale reached to catch her. "Stay back," she said, meeting his eyes. "This part is mine." She stepped into the binding circle. The chains snapped toward her wrists and waist, locking with a metallic shriek. Pain ripped up her arms. The chamber roared in protest. Ilara smiled for one triumphant breath. Then Evangeline grabbed one hot link with her bare hand and dragged it across the altar's edge until skin split along her palm. She slammed that bleeding hand onto the nearest moon iron rune, blood hissing into the carved groove, and called across the distance with a mother's precision and a wolf's claim. "Lyra," she called, giving the child her name to the whole court. "Mine." 3 paces away, a matching red mark bloomed across her daughter's brow. Something answered. Silver fire raced from the blood mark through the chain lattice. The runes under the floor burst in blinding fractures, one after another, as if a hammer were striking from inside the stone. Heat pulsed beneath Evangeline's skin, then surged. Bones shifted. White fur erupted along her arms, shoulders, spine. Her jaw lengthened around a cry that became a snarl, and then a clear, resonant howl that shook dust from the tribunal dome. She landed on 4 paws in the shattered ring, massive and white, moon-bright against black basalt. Not monstrous, sovereign. Panic hit the benches. Warriors dropped to one knee by instinct older than politics. Kale stood perfectly still, wonder and reverence carved into every line of him as he watched the wolf that had been hidden behind grief rise in full view of every witness who had called her less. Alara stumbled backward, clutching Lyra tighter. "Abomination!" she spat. The white wolf lunged, crossed the distance in one fluid arc, and slammed Alara against the moon altar with enough force to jar the dagger from her hand. It skidded across the stone and spun to a stop at Kale's boot. Evangeline pinned Alara by the shoulders, teeth bared inches from her throat, body curved around the infant in a living wall. When she spoke, the words came rough through fangs but unmistakably human. "You called my child an omen because you feared she would be loved." Alara's breath hitched, then hardened into hate. "He was promised to me by blood and rank." "Then hear your sentence by the law, you twisted." Evangeline shifted just enough to free one forepaw and hooked a leather folio from where it had fallen near the elder's bench. She flung it open across the altar, forged celestial pages, wet ink visible in streaks. Kale stepped forward and placed Bryn's directive beside it. Then Mira slammed down the rejected induction cup, and 2 moon iron runestones Rook had ripped from beneath the infirmary floor minutes earlier, their undersides etched with Alara's housemark. Voices exploded across the hall. "That is her seal. She bribed registry. Moon iron in a birth chamber." Elder Marrow, oldest of the council, rose shaking with fury. "Ilara Wildfire, do you contest these marks?" Ilara's eyes darted toward exits, toward allies who no longer met her gaze. "I acted for continuity." Kale's voice carried over the uproar like a blade laid on stone. "You acted for possession." He turned to the hall. Witness judgment. One by one, rank by rank, hands struck fists to chests in verdict rhythm. Not acquittal, not hesitation, condemnation. Kale faced Alara fully. "By alpha authority and public witness, I strip you of house, title, and claim. You are banished beyond Wildfire wards before moonset. Return, and sentence becomes death under border law." Alara went pale, then furious, then suddenly pleading as the reality reached bone. "Kale, you cannot erase me for a stranger." He did not blink. "She is my mate. High witness has spoken. And you tried to steal a child under sacred law." 2 wardens stepped in. Evangeline eased back only when Lyra was securely transferred to Mira's arms. Alara thrashed as the wardens bound her wrists with exile iron that glowed dull blue on contact. At the chamber threshold, the moon sigil overhead flared and pressed a burning brand of banishment onto the inside of Alara's forearm. She screamed Kale's name once, voice breaking, then was dragged into the corridor and out toward the outer gates. Silence followed, huge and stunned. Evangeline's white form trembled, breath harsh from birth, battle, and first shift. Kale approached slowly, palms open, and dropped to one knee in front of her in the wreckage of broken moon iron. "You did it," he said, voice unsteady with pride. "You broke all of it." The tight knot behind her ribs loosened at last. White fur receded in waves. She sank back into human shape, exhausted, shaking, alive. Mira wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and laid Lyra in her arms. The baby rooted once, then settled against Evangeline's chest. The blood mark on her brow faded to a pale rose line like a tiny crescent. Around them, the full tribunal hall bowed. Not to fear, but to witness truth no record could erase. Elder Marrow was the first to rise from his bow, his old voice carried to every bench. "Public witness has condemned treachery. Public witness must also seal succession. Under moon law, The alpha may claim his mate before dawn if she gives free consent. No one argued. No one dared turn that night into another backroom bargain. Mira tightened the blanket around Evangeline and touched Lyra's cheek to settle the infant before speaking to Kale. She lost blood. She shifted for the first time. If this is done, it is done with care. Or not at all. Kale's gaze never left Evangeline. Only if she asks. Evangeline looked down at her daughter, white down bright against dark wool, then at the shattered chains still smoking at the edges of the tribunal ring. She had spent months being moved like cargo between men with laws in their mouths and hunger in their eyes. She would not be moved now unless she chose the direction. "Take us to the stone circle," she said, voice hoarse but steady. "No private chamber. I want witnesses." They walked slowly through the upper passage as moonlight spilled through slit windows and bars of silver. Rook and Taryn took point. Mira walked at Evangeline's left, one hand ready at her elbow. Kale kept pace on her right without touching. Behind them came Elder Marrow with two scribes carrying the seized evidence in sealed satchels, Ilara's forged folio, Bryn's directive order, the induction cup wrapped in linen, and the moon iron runestones tagged with house marks for archive judgment. The ceremonial dagger was placed in a locked chest for the armory record, its transfer witnessed aloud at the stair landing. Nothing vanished into rumor. Nothing slipped out of sight. At the circle, rain had stopped. The mountain breathed cold pine and wet granite. 12 standing stones ringed a flat altar slab veined with mica that caught moonlight like ice under clear water. Wolves lined the outer ridge in silent ranks, and pack members filled the terraces below, cloaks dark against silver night. No one shouted. The quiet felt ceremonial, almost reverent. Mira settled Lyra into a fur-lined cradle basket at the altar's edge and set the small carved wolf from Kale's sister beside her tiny fist. The moonstone token Evangeline had carried across the causeway lay on the blanket near Lyra's shoulder, tied with fresh thread so it could not roll. Past and future, both visible. Kale stepped into the center and dropped to one knee, head bowed. "Evangeline Ravencrest, hear me before Pack and Moon. I ask to mark you as my mate." He lifted his face, waiting. She studied him without haste. The scar at his throat, the rain-damp hair at his collar, the male who had knelt in mud, in infirmary lamplight, and now again before the entire court. He had power enough to compel. He kept choosing not to. "I hear you," she said. His voice stayed low, formal. "Do you consent to my bite at your throat, with full right to refuse now or at any breath after?" "Yes." A murmur moved through the terraces and fell silent again. Kale continued, as law required and, as promise demanded. "Do you consent knowing this bond cannot be politically undone?" "Yes." He held her gaze on the final ask, and all the old fear in her recognized the seriousness in his restraint. "Do you consent because you choose me, not because you were cornered by war?" Evangeline felt the answer rise from a place grief had not destroyed. "Yes, I choose you." He rose only then and offered his hand. She placed her fingers in his and stepped close enough to feel his breath at her temple. The world narrowed to moonlight, stone, and pulse. Kyle brushed her hair aside, exposing the junction of neck and shoulder. He paused there, one last question in his eyes. She tipped her chin in assent. His bite was precise, deep enough to mark, controlled enough not to maim. Pain flared bright and sharp, then cracked open into heat that raced down her spine in waves. Her knees trembled. His arm locked around her waist to keep her upright without pinning her. Gold light spilled from the mark and traveled along the bond threads at their wrists, threading into her chest, her lungs, the very rhythm of her heart. She felt him through it, not as command, but as flood, cedar smoke, winter air, The old ache of 12 names counted in darkness, the terrible tenderness of a male who had feared devotion because he knew its cost. Her own answering current surged back along the same path. Ash and rain, shrine smoke, labor cries, the stubborn pulse that had refused to die on a black causeway. He released her slowly and pressed his forehead to hers, voice rough with emotion. Mine. She touched the fresh mark with 2 fingers, wincing at the sting and smiling through it anyway. Yours. Then she took his jaw in her blood-warm hand and pulled him down. Your turn, she whispered. Surprise flashed across his face, then fierce joy. He angled his throat, exposing his pulse point above the collarbone. Evangeline tasted salt, rain, and wolf when she bit. The skin gave. His breath punched out in a low sound that was more relief than pain. Silver-white light burst from his mark and met the gold still burning at hers, spiraling around them in a braided column that rose high enough to paint every standing stone. Gasps broke from the terraces. Several wolves threw back their heads and answered with one long, resonant call. She held the bite long enough to claim, then released and pressed her palm flat over his racing pulse. The bond sealed with a palpable settling, like a lock turning into its final notch after months of pressure against the wrong key. Noise receded. Fear receded. Not gone, never erased, but no longer steering. Mate, he breathed, voice breaking on the word before he steadied it. She laughed softly at the tremor in him and leaned in until their foreheads touched again. Mine, she said. Yours, he answered. Mira cleared her throat with theatrical impatience that made a few strained faces on the terraces finally crack into brief, grateful smiles. If you two are done rewriting sacred law by staring at each other, the child wants feeding. Evangeline turned at once. Cale moved with her, one hand at her back, and together they went to Lyra. The baby had started to fuss, tiny fists working free of the blanket. Evangeline gathered her close, and the mark on Lyra's brow glimmered once, then faded to a soft crescent again as she settled at her mother's heartbeat. Cale knelt beside them, resting one broad hand over both of theirs. Mine, he whispered to the infant, then looked at Evangeline and amended it with a reverence that held no ownership at all. Ours. By sunrise, the great hall was full again, this time by summons rather than panic. Cale stood at the moonstone table with Elder Marrow, Mira, and the full witness roster while scribes recorded each clause aloud. The evidence sat in sealed trays before them. Forged folio entered and condemned, directive order nullified, induction mixture logged as attempted coercion, rune stones transferred to the deep vault for prohibited artifacts, ceremonial dagger reassigned to armory inventory. Bryn confessed to taking Alara's coin and was sentenced to 10 years border labor under guard. Lisa testified she had followed false medical authority. Mira accepted her into supervised service with no access to birthing care until retrained and resworn. The 2 young nobles who had mocked Evangeline in the infirmary gave public apology and were assigned winter supply duty in the displacement quarter. Their loaded glances in corridors never ripened into further schemes. Shame and hard labor did what fear had not. Before the revisions, Elder Marrow called the final pending matter, House Varen's custody claim. Under truce guard, a Varen herald was brought to the hall with 2 neutral border wardens who had witnessed Evangeline invoke sanctuary at the gate. Their testimony and Lyra's birth record made the ruling immediate. Marrow voided the claimant seal. Cale bound the judgment with death on breach terms. The herald signed withdrawal, and noon scouts confirmed every Varen rider had quit Wildfire territory. Then Cale spoke the law revisions, each line clear enough for the backbenches. From this day, widow claim, child claim, and unmated female claim may be made directly to Alpha Seat without noble sponsorship. Sanctuary challenge requires full public witness. No guardianship transfer may occur without maternal consent unless the mother is dead. By healer confirmation. He signed. Elder Marrow signed. Mira signed as medical authority. Evangeline signed last, her name steady. The coronation followed in the same hall with no silk theatrics, only stone, fire, and oath. Marrow placed the high Luna torque around Evangeline's shoulders, forged silver inlaid with white enamel at the throat to mark the first white wolf line in Wildfire record. Not by marriage alone, the elder declared, but by demonstrated power, lawful witness, and chosen bond. Pack members struck fists to chests in rolling unison. Even the skeptical elders bowed. Rook and Terran were promoted to captain rank for refusing unlawful transfer orders. Mira accepted the post of high healer with full autonomy over birthing chambers, and immediately ordered every moon iron fitting removed and melted under her supervision. That afternoon, the fortress gates opened to a line of war-displaced families waiting in the lower yard. Some with children asleep on shoulders, some with all their belongings in one sack. Evangeline stood beneath the gate arch in her new torque and old boots. Lyra bundled against her chest and welcomed them by name as clerks read the registry. No one was asked for noble sponsorship. No one was turned away for lack of rank. Across the yard, Kale drilled sentries in new sanctuary protocols, correcting stances, redirecting patrol lines, making protection practical instead of ceremonial. When he finished, he crossed to Evangeline, took Lyra for a moment with surprising gentleness, and watched as Evangeline and Mira began the evening healing rite for the newly arrived. Warm broth, herb checks, sleeping pallets, and hands laid on shaking shoulders until breath returned. As dusk settled, Evangeline stepped onto the rampart with Kale beside her and Lyra between them in a sling lined with wolf fur. Below, cook fires lit the courtyards in scattered amber circles. Above, the mountain sky cleared to hard, bright stars. "No more running," Kale said quietly. She leaned into him, mark warm at her throat, daughter safe against her heart, fortress gates open behind them and Varen banners gone from the lower road. "No more leaving." He kissed her brow, then her marked shoulder, and the bond answered with a calm, steady glow that felt like home, built in real time. Chosen, witnessed, and finally secure.